Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jessica Campbell, and I'm here to kick off the event. But Crystal Campbell, who is joining you, will be talking us through courageous design for uncertain times. I have a few housekeeping things, and then I'm going to turn it straight over to her to get going. We would love to hear from you. Say hi in the chat screen. Over there along the bottom, you'll notice that there is chat and then there's questions. Please, if you have questions, pop those in the question tab, not in the chat. I will be following along in the questions button there and answering those as we go along. But yes, thank you. Oh my gosh, hello, hello, hello. So fun to see everybody. But yeah, say hi in the chat. And then if you have questions, please pop those into the questions button down at the bottom. If you've used Livestorm before, they have changed the UI a little bit. So familiarize yourself with that if you need to. But yeah, otherwise, Crystal, I will let you take it away from here. And I'm going to go ahead and mute and turn off my camera, but I will be around answering questions.
That'd be great, Jessica. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here this, it's evening for me, to talk about what courageous design is. And as Jessica said, please throw comments and questions into the chat. I am really curious to know what you're thinking as I'm talking, and if we are not able to answer your questions today, I'm going to write a follow-up blog post on this, and I will definitely address some of those questions in the blog post. And for all the examples and links that I talk about today, those will also be in the blog post for you to access. So don't worry about if I skip through quite fast on some of the references. Okay, so let's start. So I'm expecting the presentation to take about 40 minutes. And after that, I would love to discuss anything on your mind. I like to describe myself as a hands-dirty kind of designer, but I always find myself setting a few lofty goals. And this year it seemed to be being courageous in one's design practice. So I'm going to share those musings. But it's important to me to also show you some real-world practical applications of what that can look like in today's world. So I will be doing that. Yes, so it's been a whole calendar year since the last time I did a webinar, and everything has changed, nothing has changed. We all feel like we've aged 1,000 years and maybe our life has been a little bit paused, but there has definitely been things happening, so let's have a look. I hope there's no doubt you'll agree that these are uncertain times. Looking back over 2021, or the so-called end of the pandemic that we thought was coming, or actually not quite the end, but at least the beginning of the end, perhaps. Certainly for the lawyer who came as a cat to a hearing this year, and another year of extreme climate disasters around the world, the growing acceptance of the urgency of climate change and the poor health of our planet. And in other news, we experienced an enforced temporary social media detox for a couple hours in October, and then watched Peloton stocks plummet just because of a TV series. And then back to real life. It's been a year with almost as many protest movements globally as the record-breaking amount in 2020. And we saw social, political, and economic uncertainty, much that felt pretty unreal. There were moments of hope, light, and at pure times, pure silly delight. And 2021 continued to push forward on gender and systemic racism and finding the vocabulary to frankly discuss mental health and digital and social media addiction. Okay, so there's a design presentation and I've just shown you the world in review. That's because we're designers of experiences and everything we do touches the lives of the people we design for. And our collective lived contexts also have an impact on the designs we work on. You're probably wondering what courageous design even is. And I had a few moments in my research when I did too, I have to admit. In this presentation, I'm defining courageous design as a moral strength to advocate for people and planet in our designs. This can manifest in features or product launches, or it can even impact a design community as a whole. Whether we're aware of it or not, the ways we live and interact with and make sense of the world and design it do have an impact. There's an argument that you will hear, if you haven't already, that we are only designers. So we take ownership of positive results and we can just transfer undesirable consequences to anyone or anything, just not us. Of course, it's more comfortable to turn a blind eye and not to have any skin in the game. If we live in a world where something goes wrong, we must face consequences of our actions, behaviors, skill sets. And this is the courage that I speak of. My intention is to inspire you as junior designers and designers new to our craft and gift you with tools to take this path of being courageous. The internet is a wide place and the road can be rocky, and sometimes it's difficult to know where to begin to look. These are the practices that I will discuss today. There's a challenge in design to create experiences that are adaptable, flexible, scalable, and most importantly, usable by as many people as possible. And our goal as designers is to be advocates for improving human experiences of everyone, not just a few. And now also for non-humans or the planet. So I'll start with open up the world. This is, to me, about being relentlessly open in your designs. Open design at its core is about access. Access to services and information must be available to all, regardless of circumstance, device, or location. You have to accept that your work touches lives, so you take on the responsibility to improve the interactions people have with information. Look at this example from this year. Twitter has finally allowed users to identify the languages they speak, then also choose languages that they'd like to see tweets in. Allowing people to use Twitter to view tweets, trends, and find users whose content was originally published in those languages. Believe it or not, this is an innovation in the product, finally recognizing that English is not everyone's first language and allowing users to personalize content that they want to see. And also expanding the potential audience of tweets and trends to individuals outside the areas. Over here, we have an update to a feature from Google this year, allowing business owners to mark their businesses to highlight specific ownership attributes, as well as LGBTQ and transgender-friendly spaces, and make provisions for accessibility on their Google listing. So that allows customers to know where they're welcome. These attributes appear on the business Google listing in Maps and Search, and they can have a significant impact on improving the quality of experience a person navigating the search would have, because search engines are the primary way people using the internet find the content that they're looking for. And biases built into algorithms mean it's sometimes hard or even impossible to find things you're looking for. And in this case, beauty results that don't center on Caucasian faces and features has been an issue for years. Like most social networks, Pinterest was built on assumptions and biases. And unlike most social networks, Pinterest admitted it this past year. Their new feature, described by them as the latest advancement in inclusive beauty search with the rollout of hair pattern and skin tone search. Well, that's the PR. What we can see, it's an opening of information, allowing for a new richness and experience to be finally in the hands of the people. So what do these examples have in common? It's that they are incrementally opening up the previously narrow spaces that we had online, spaces that worked for few rather than many, and moving us towards a digital openness. These are questions you can ask yourself, your team, your project, as you progress as a designer. Has the design scope left some groups of people worse off? In other words, did we start with a narrow view in the first place? What are the core assumptions in this project? Have we considered all the players that might be affected in this design, including non-human ones? How might our designs be adapted to account for different systemic perspectives? Are our designs taking into account impact on the planet or promoting behavior change for the better? Are there design tools and methodologies that we can adapt to open up our view? Now that we've opened up, we already know that we tend to approach design through the lens of our own perspective, that we are biased, and that we need to design purposely to mitigate this at best. Oftentimes, we only find out about unintended ethical harms once they've already reached the people we've been designing for. So let's be more proactive about this earlier on. Year in review features rolled out for Facebook this year, where people can share their personalized year together card, which highlights friends, feelings, places, and people that mattered most to them. But actually, year in review is not new at all. What is new is the fact that you can now customize it. Because in 2015, the term inadvertent algorithmic cruelty was coined when year in review algorithm forced painful memories back to the surface, and people experiencing these had no way to customize or switch off their feed. The designers at Facebook had not considered people with negative life experiences. As designers, we like to imagine how we can delight our users, but people appreciate much more than delight, and we must ask ourselves and design for the what-if scenarios. Gender data collection is another commonly overlooked moment that can cause distress to people. When there is really no use for it, sometimes it's better to skip gender collection altogether. But if it's needed, then using something like a type ahead feature can improve the user experience by supplying hints or a list of possible choices based on the text entered while still retaining a structure to the information. We must also consider, have we been upfront about the usage when collecting people's data? Do they know why we're collecting this? And in this clever example from the insurance company Lemonade, toothbrushes are used because they're comparatively free of implications regarding users' background, gender identity, or abilities. The illustrations and accompanying text both allow users to select a response to the question without making assumptions about the users themselves. This was quite a moment this year, wasn't it? When US President Donald Trump's Twitter account was permanently suspended. Yes, we also have to design in mind for abuse, because another way we can cause emotional harm to our users is by forgetting to design safeguards to prevent the abuse. So you can ask, what is our bias impact statement and what steps are we taking to mitigate it? Have we explicitly called out the bias that we've brought into this project so that we can address it? Have we considered the alternatives to the happy path for our users? Yes, it's our role as designers to consider that the experience of all users, not just the majority. Do our users have control over access to their data, and can they remove it? Begin with how much data you actually want and need to collect. Remember, less is better. The more you track and plan to do with the data you're collecting, the more you need to communicate that to the user. How might people abuse this feature to hurt others, and how can a user take action against it? Never hide behind the excuse, I just put it online. What people do with it is their own problem. Words matter. You know that feeling when you doubt your abilities and second guess your design decisions? It's uncomfortable, right? It's about stepping into that and being curious and open. You have to accept that your work and your words touches lives. Here is an example from Google of their developer documentation, where they have explicitly called out inclusivity and diversity in mind, and has some great general guidelines and examples to illustrate the best practices to follow. Regardless of the phrases used, it's necessary to understand that certain terms reinforce biases and that replacing them is a positive step, both in creating a more welcoming atmosphere for everyone and in being more technically accurate. This small yet innovative inclusion for word processing in both Microsoft and Google this year has a power to promote the mitigation of bias that people have and inspire purposeful behavior change over time. In fact, teach us to write better. In recent updates to their tools, you can now turn on inclusive language checker features and it will identify bias in documents, just as it does grammatical spelling errors. And here's a material design example for screen reader copywriting for people with visual impairment that explains the importance of context and meaning in the design of words, because your designs need to be usable by people with disabilities, and considerations like these have to be fully integrated into your design processes, even if they're not visual. So you can ask, do we have a working definition of what inclusive copywriting looks like for our project? Using simple words and short sentences is inclusive. This makes information neutral and more easily accessible for everyone. Have we used easy language? Have we provided usable, clear alternatives for when needed? And does it sufficiently capture the essence of the original? Not everyone will read the words on your screen, and some people will be listening to it with screen readers. And finally, have we put time aside to write copy for the people with accessibility needs? This shouldn't be a last-minute part of the project. Look to the light. Welcome to the murky world of dark patterns. This is about seeing dark and grey patterns for what they are and striving to design honest interfaces. In Netflix Social Dilemma, we learn how closely data and web design work together to shape our decision-making. These types of addictive designs are often referred to as dark patterns, in which the goal is to trigger the user to take action for the benefit of the company rather than the user. Today, I'm not going to present dark patterns. There is an excellent resource online called darkpatterns.org that I strongly recommend you go have a look at. Here we have a 404 page, which is essentially a path failure that a user would run into. So what is a good 404 error page? It needs to show your user that even when things aren't going right, everything's going to be all right. Error pages should reassure, delight, and guide users to interesting content. Taking the time to craft an awesome, memorable page is a worthwhile investment. Look at this example. Look what they do with font and copy. They even have a search bar so you can continue navigating. And best of all, and on brand, is the humorous choice of content below. Yes, we all don't like cookies, I'm sure. They are generally pretty annoying. And one place where we can't easily see light or honest patterns is in cookie design. This is a gray pattern. I couldn't find any light or honest patterns because the ones that do fall into that category are very large and difficult to read. And so in a way, it doesn't really achieve the light status. This example admittedly does have some information tucked away, but the secondary CTA, which is called accept only necessary cookies, helps the user decide if they want to choose the primary CTA and move straight ahead or do some personalization. Good news for earlier this year, Google and Facebook were fined €210 million over user tracking by a European data privacy watchdog, saying that the websites were making it difficult for users to refuse their cookies. And here's an example from Duolingo that asks for permission to send push notifications very early on in the user onboarding experience and immediately states the benefits of allowing notifications to stay on track with their language goals. Now, these are clearly business goals, but the UX design sticks to an honest interface and principles of clearly explaining the benefit that it will bring to the user and explicitly setting up notifications with an easy place for the user to go to change them should they need to. The user is in control. So here you can ask, does everyone using this feel welcome and safe? Have our designs tested accessible to everyone? Interview people across a range of ages, races, locations, interests, abilities, and gender orientations to find these answers. Are people able to access and interact with the content in their preferred way? Keep standing up for your users. Many designers know their companies use coercive and deceptive design, but struggle to stop it. Do our company principles align with our UX patterns? Are we proud to be ambassadors of our UX patterns? Humanizing the people affected can also be an effective way to put across your point if the answer is not yes. So the last couple of practices that I've spoken about have very strongly advocated for people. And so I feel like the planet can get a section for itself. Inclusivity and accessibility are becoming more and more of a standard set of expectations in design work. And now we need to speak up and advocate on behalf of our planet that is voiceless. This is a really interesting case study from an online supermarket in Norway called Oda. Their tech and design team wanted to have people aligned with the climate footprint and understand what their CO2 emissions were. And so they did a number of different design experiments and eventually ended up with this visualization where you can see the 3 lines on the screen in front of you. Those are 3 different shopping trips that this person has done. And it is visualized in red, yellow, and green for amount of carbon emissions. And they found that customers began to tweak their shopping habits accordingly once this was launched. So a nice example, and I strongly advise you having a read of that case study. Okay, this is a website design for Branch, which is a sustainable journal. And what is particularly fascinating about this design is if you have a look at the grid intensity view description, and then you have 4 different states: live, low, moderate, and high. And essentially, they have designed their website in 4 different views, depending on how much internet accessibility you have, and also how much carbon emissions you want to make when you use this page. And I think it is a really interesting blueprint for web design of the future. Here we have a kind of interesting example going into the physical world with that QR code on the label there and an app. It's a luxury tech partnership between Ralph Lauren and Everything, which is a technology company, and Vestair, which is a secondhand marketplace. And these QR codes embedded into the labels now allow people to view every step of the service chain the item of clothing has been through, from when it was a roll of fabric until it becomes a secondhand good. And finally, we have an example from called Earth Definition. Essentially, there has been a movement in the last year to add Earth Definition and also promote change in people's behaviors. We don't need to watch videos in HD on our mobile phones. We can watch them much lower. And if we do that, there is a significant impact on emissions and no impact on the definition of the video that we're watching. So you can ask, does the product or service incorporate carbon-aware design? Is the experience optimized to work across devices and platforms? You can ask questions about the design and if the design has been purposely designed with fonts, video, animation, and imagery to work in an efficient way. Have we provided clear guidelines for maintaining this project according to planet-centric principles? This is really about handing over your piece of work. Do the people who are receiving your design work know how to keep it alive? Have we sufficiently educated and inspired others to become ambassadors of this project and advocates of planet-centric design? Have you passed it on? Okay, so what to do when you can't? I'm conscious that one of the most common discussions I have with my students at Designlab is what to do if you want to learn how to be an inclusive designer, but you might not have access to working with a diverse set of people. So what can you do when you're in this position? I will share some proxy alternatives with you, meaning they're better than doing nothing at all and a worthwhile first step into this world. But please bear in mind, they are not substitutes for working with real people or real situations. And you will be applying bias to your design solutions. As long as you're aware of this and you're transparent in the presentation of those solutions, it's a good first step. These are called empathy generators, and I urge you to experiment with these. Let's start with the green one in the top left-hand corner. This promotes designers to consider multiple perspectives and a range of circumstances during the design process, and encourages teams to design for a wide variety of needs from the onset to ensure that what they are designing for has been built with inclusivity at the core. We move across to the top right. The empathy prompts generator are prompts to consider when making things for others to use, and are geared towards anyone involved with making digital products. Try a few of these and see how your perspective can change. We go to the bottom left. This is an empathy generator using scenarios from the brilliant Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, which is another very good read that I recommend. And bottom right, this is a design challenge generator from Soften Design. So if you want to practice your inclusive design problem-solving skills and whiteboarding, this is a good place to start. Okay, so let's say that we are in the middle or the beginning of a project. We're in the discovery part, and we are trying to understand who our users are. And we want to have some personas and some data and some understanding of a more inclusive set than what we have access to. So these are good proxies that you can use. The one in the top left is government data that is open source for you to use from the UK government. It was collected with robust user research in 2019. And there are 7 accessibility personas here that have also been put together that make for an interesting pin persona, for example. If you go across to the top right, this is from Idean, which is a design agency. They have designed these cards for humanity. It's a generator of inclusive personas. It's a fast way to put together some pin personas that are very light touch. Let's say you want to test your designs. How do you test your designs for inclusivity if you don't have someone or a group of people to do user research with or usability testing with? Well, one proxy solution is what you see in the bottom left. It's from Funkify, and it's a disability simulator. It's a plugin from Chrome and is also now a Figma plugin. And they have a really interesting set, many more than 4. They have about, I think, 8 or 12 different personas with a wide range of disabilities. Once you start one of these in the plugin, it will take over your page and give you a kind of hands-on experience of what the closest it could feel like. The other thing you can do is a concept called persona testing, where you take the personas that you developed at the beginning of your project and you use them as a kind of proxy layer or lens by which you evaluate the designs that you've put through. Okay, so we have come to the end of the presentation. And I'll leave you with this thought. As a designer, you have the power and duty to inspire change. To be inclusive is to create a space that is welcoming regardless of race, ethnicity, age, education, profession, and disabilities. We want to create products that all of our audience can enjoy and are able to use exactly as they require, and also in a way that is not harmful to others or the planet. And sometimes that is having the courage to lead the change. Sometimes it's the courage to speak up in the middle of a project or ask hard questions no one wants to ask. And it's always having the courage to advocate for people and planet over profit. So thank you very much for coming. And I will have a look at the chat with Jessica and see what we can answer there.
Yeah. So one of the questions that was popping up for folks, I got some of those links, and I believe somebody else popped a link in, but there was some questions around if we could get like the case study links.
Yes.
Potentially.
I am going to, I'm going to do two things. I'm putting together a blog of this presentation, and all the links will be there, and it will be published on Designlab blog space in probably the next 2 weeks. And I think that we can probably email all the participants afterwards.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So we can do that. I'll do it that way.
Yes, we can absolutely send that straight out. And I want to confirm that there will not be a PDF of this presentation. It will be the blog where they can access this information again. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So we have a question from Emily. Are there any good examples, and let me go ahead and start this live. Are there any good examples of government websites / services that design courageously?
Yeah. So my widest amount of knowledge, and also area that I've worked in, is inside UK government. So I'm just going to focus in there. I don't have any specific examples, but I would say that GDS, which is the Government Digital Services, has really led the way for government way of looking at how to design digital products and digital transformation in a courageous way. They have spearheaded things like speaking in plain English, simplicity, having design systems that are usable, and doing accessibility testings on all of their websites and services that go live. I will include that link in what we share later to the GDS online hub.
Perfect. And I think that covers just about all the questions that people have popped in so far. Overall, it seems like we've got some really positive reactions to the presentation. Really interesting stuff, Crystal. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Does anybody else have questions? We have time. Now is your moment to ask the live gal Crystal here, rather than maybe not getting a hold of it later.
I also have a question for the chat that I can put out, which is, I would love to know what courageous design means to the participants, and how they feel like they might manifest that.
Love that. Can y'all answer? I would love to see answers going on in the chat for that. We did have another question pop in. Crystal, would you be able to share a time where you had an ethics or a moral challenge while designing in the workplace?
Yes.
And how did you handle it?
Yeah. So I think that's it definitely was a turning point for me, where I had to find that moment in myself to decide which path I was going to take. And it was around user research. So you get these moments as a consultant, especially, I think, where the project needs to move at such a speed that, although we are supposed to be user research first and advocates for our users, there's a lot of pressure from the project itself to move at such a speed that you don't speak to the right groupings of people. And how did we move past that? Well, we moved past that in a few different ways. One was being very transparent about where the research was coming from, how large our group of research was, in this case, how small. Writing those caveats in the presentations and sharing that out, and then building into the next phase of the project further research work. So basically at every moment that I had, I would try and squeeze in a little bit of extra research until we had that grouping that was big enough that I felt like we were moving in the right direction. I think you might be on mute, Jessica.
My bad. I muted myself while I was tippy typing. Sorry. There is another question, which is there a module on accessibility and inclusivity in Designlab's UX program? And I know there is for sure, but I cannot remember where it comes. Do you remember where in the program?
No, I don't.
By chance? No.
But I do know that it comes up.
It does. And I will say that Crystal and I are both on the mentorship team. We hire our mentors and support and train them. Inclusivity and thinking about how to design accessibility, like with accessibility in mind, is really big for a lot of our mentors, most I would say, and they find ways to help incorporate that when you're having conversations with them. But if you're in the program, you know, this is student led, right? Not instructor led. So if you have questions about how could my designs be better, or what resources do you use, please ask your mentor and see what they share, because yes, it's in the program, but I think it's a dialogue as well.
Yes, and everybody has a different experience and way of addressing it in their design practice. So it's definitely an interesting question to ask out to more experienced designers and your mentor.
Yeah. We're getting some fun answers on courageous design and how people incorporate that in their designs, being transparent, using they, them as pronouns. Yeah. Trying to think about perspectives. Absolutely.
Yes. I like courage goes hand in hand with creativity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we have another question from Jennifer. Do you know of any great specialty programs on inclusive / accessible design?
I do not.
I don't either. And I mean, I often would suggest going local and talking, like seeing if you have any resources in your local area, particularly if you're in the States where DE&I and accessibility has become a really major push. I understand it may not be as accessible everywhere, but looking local, because there are a lot of folks, for example, I'm in Portland, Oregon, who specialize in these types of topics and teaching these topics. So I would even look to your local programs.
I think that's a great idea. I thought while you were speaking, I was just thinking that also volunteering at an NGO that does work in that space for a short period of time, or offering to work or in those kinds of fields for a while, also give you a touch into needs and groupings of people.
Yeah, but programs that focus solely on this type of design, none are coming to mind for me. It's typically about consultancy, I find, or events like this where people bring together the collaborative ideas as a whole.
Yes.
Yeah, great question though. Any others while we're here? Thank you again for continuing to pop in your answers on how you are courageous designers. I love it. Let's see, another question. Oh, we've got a resource over in the questions. Let's just pop that over in the chat. I'll paste it over. Maybe, if my mouse would work with me here. Well, I think that covers it for us today. I'm not seeing anything else come in through the questions channel. Thank you again, everybody, for coming, for participating, for sharing your LinkedIns. I love that. I hope you made a bunch of new connections here, for sharing resources throughout this. Please do watch out for the email that we will send specifically to this group with links. And then later for the blog that will cover this more. Don't thank me. Thank Crystal. I'm just here to like watch the chat screen.
It's been lovely to have such a great group of people in the chat and asking such fantastic questions and sharing their courageous design
and
descriptions. I appreciate that.
Keep designing courageously. And y'all have a great rest of your day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are in this world.
Yes.
Bye.
Goodbye.